But who was Mozart really? Welcome to Calapex, where history comes to life and where each video takes you into the destinies of those who shaped the world. Today we head to the heart of Europe's courts, where the name of a prodigy child rings out, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, a genius capable of composing from the age of 5, improvising in front of kings, and filling theaters with immortal operas. But behind the legend of the carefree musician lies a tormented life, a race against time, marked by debts, intrigues, and a mysterious death at only 35 years old. So, who was Mozart really? But before we embark on a new adventure, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss anything. Thank you, and have a nice trip. Around 1750, the world experienced political, economic, and intellectual upheavals, as Europe, Asia, and the Americas forged increasingly dense ties of exchange and rivalry. Maritime routes expanded in the Atlantic, Indian Ocean, and Pacific, allowing unprecedented circulation of goods, people, and ideas. Colonial trading posts multiplied on the African, Asian, and American coasts, transporting spices, textiles, metals, and slaves to plantations in the Caribbean and North America. The west coast of Africa was particularly marked by the slave trade, and the large Caribbean islands saw their populations transformed by these forced arrivals. Colonial tensions between the French, British, Spanish, and Portuguese fueled armed confrontations throughout the second half of the 18th century. The great port cities, such as London, Amsterdam, or Lisbon, experienced notable demographic growth thanks to these exchanges. They equipped themselves with docks, shipyards, and maritime exchanges, concentrating capital and specialized labor. Bordeaux and Nantes enriched themselves from transatlantic trade, while Cadiz became a major hub for trade with the Latin American colonies. In London, the population exceeded 700,000 inhabitants on the eve of 1750, illustrating the emergence of an urban society. At the same time, the countryside was gradually modernizing, even though many peasants still suffered difficult conditions, exposed to climatic hazards, wars, and high taxes. European powers constantly redefined their alliances and spheres of influence. France, led by Louis XV since 1715, remained an absolute monarchy based on a privileged nobility, a centralized administration, and a cultural momentum around Paris and Versailles, but was undermined by growing public debt due to costly military campaigns. Spain, under the Bourbon dynasty, imported from France at the beginning of the 18th century, sought to consolidate its colonial empire in Central and South America, while controlling sometimes reluctant local elites. Madrid concentrated power, reflecting an absolutism marked by official Catholicism and a hierarchical bureaucracy. The Holy Roman Empire, mainly governed by the Habsburgs, remained a collection of plural states. Austria, Bohemia, Hungary, and small German principalities maintained a delicate balance under the authority of Vienna. Maria Theresa of Austria, at the head of the empire since 1740, launched administrative, fiscal, and military reforms, while confronting the ambitions of Frederick II of Prussia. The Ottoman Empire, centered on Constantinople, showed signs of retreat in Eastern Europe, but maintained influence in the Mediterranean and the Near East. Russia, under Catherine II from 1762, modernized according to Western models. The court of St. Petersburg hosted European philosophers and artists, while the army expanded towards the Black Sea and the Caucasus. Across the Channel, Great Britain relied on a parliamentary regime that, since the Glorious Revolution of 1688, limited the power of the monarch and strengthened the role of Parliament. This political structure favored the economic and maritime rise of the kingdom. London invested massively in its Royal Navy to defend its overseas interests, in North America as well as in India. Leveraging an advanced banking system, and the dynamism of its bourgeoisie, England became a hegemonic sea power, destined to compete with France. Transatlantic exchanges developed, connecting the 13 American colonies, the Caribbean, and British ports. Rivalries opposed or allied France, Great Britain, Spain, and other powers in increasingly global conflicts. The 7 Years' War, which began in 1756 and ended in 1763, illustrates this conflicted globalization. Starting as a border dispute between France and Great Britain in North America, it quickly spread to Europe, India, and the Caribbean. In America, the French and the British, supported by Native American allies, fought for control of the Ohio Valley and Canada. In Europe, Frederick II's Prussia faced Austria, Russia, and France, while Great Britain provided financial and military support to Prussia. In India, the French and the British sought to control trade through the East India Company, influencing or sidelining various local princes. In the Caribbean, Martinique and Guadeloupe were coveted for their sugar production and the trade of sugar and rum. The war resulted in a clear advantage for Great Britain. The Treaty of Paris in 1763 secured their grip on Canada and reinforced their status as the foremost maritime power, but at the cost of a huge debt that would affect their fiscal policy and soon ignite tensions in North America. Away from the battlefields, an intellectual revolution was permeating cultured society. The Enlightenment, a movement born in England with John Locke and Francis Bacon, found resonance in France, Germany, and elsewhere in Europe. Philosophers encouraged reason and critical observation to question dogmas, superstitions, and abuses of power. Voltaire, Rousseau, Diderot, and Kant shaped a demanding thought process focused on human progress and social improvement. The Encyclopedia, begun in 1751 under the direction of Diderot and d'Alembert, became a symbol of this intent to gather and disseminate knowledge from theology to geometry, including arts and crafts. The proliferation of literary salons, often hosted by high society women like Madame Geoffrin or Madame du Deffand, created a new space for sociability. Writers, scientists, journalists, and musicians debated philosophical or political subjects, sometimes under the watchful eye of foreign ambassadors. In these enlightened circles, the first learned societies were born, academies of sciences or belles lettres officially recognized by the authorities. They published reports, organized contests, and facilitated the circulation of critical or innovative ideas. Between 1750 and 1760, the beginnings of the Industrial Revolution transformed production and landscapes in Europe. In England, inventors and entrepreneurs improved steam engines, first developed by Thomas Newcomen around 1712 and later perfected by James Watt, starting from 1763-1765. These machines, initially designed to pump water from mines, quickly found other applications in the industry. Simultaneously, the first mechanical spinning factories, like the spinning jenny, developed by James Hargreaves around 1764 and 1765, initiated the mechanization of textile production. Factories began organizing around major English cities, attracting rural workers and gradually transforming the approach to work and technology, while the landed aristocracy and mercantile bourgeoisie invested in these projects. European society remained highly hierarchical. The noble elite still concentrated land ownership and enjoyed time-honored privileges. Feudal obligations burdened peasants, who were dependent on a lord or a religious congregation for access to land. Urban bourgeoisie gained influence through global trade and the rise of new industries. Artisans remained numerous, organized into guilds that required several years of training to become journeymen and then masters. Part of the population survived in poverty through occasional work, religious charity, or community assistance. Literacy made slow progress through Jesuit missions and parochial schools, especially in urban or semi-urban areas. Medicine remained rudimentary, mixing traditions, folk remedies, and early experimental discoveries, while hospitals were basic and infant mortality high. Religion, which is omnipresent, is the subject of emerging challenges. Enlightenment ideas encourage critical thinking towards the church and its political influence. The elites debate religious tolerance, while monarchical powers try to contain the contestation. Nevertheless, piety remains strong. Pilgrimages and processions punctuate the annual calendar, combining Christian rites and local traditions. Orthodox Russia maintains a deep attachment to its liturgy and monarchy, while also experiencing internal reformist currents. Protestants adapt their institutions to local realities. Throughout Europe, religion remains a social glue, despite the tensions and discrimination faced by Jewish minorities in Central and Eastern Europe. At the courts of great sovereigns, artistic culture is manifested through lavish performances, balls, and operas. In France, the Rococo or Rocaille style permeates bourgeois and aristocratic interiors, with elegant motifs and a profusion of ornaments. From architecture to decorative arts and painting, the elites seek delicateness and sophistication. Court music, which is very codified, differs from popular music, orally transmitted in the countryside, or played in city squares. Popular pieces accompany village festivals, fairs, or religious ceremonies with instruments like the violin or bagpipes, while princely halls prefer harpsichords, viols, and early orchestral ensembles. Official celebrations reflect power through music and dance, symbols of a highly coded art of living. In the German-speaking sphere, to which Salzburg belongs, prince archbishops and secular patrons play a crucial role in the flourishing of the arts. Court composers receive a solid education, often passed down from master to student in schools affiliated with the clergy or private chapels. Sovereigns allocate budgets to attract the most talented musicians and enhance their prestige. In the mid-18th century, the Gallant style favors melodic clarity, lightness of accompaniment, and brevity of pieces, distancing itself from the late Baroque. Italian composers and their opera buffa circulate throughout Europe. German-speaking aristocrats cultivate a taste for Italian, considered the language of opera and virtuosic singing. Virtuosos like the violinist Giuseppe Tartini gain fame in Padua and Prague, while Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach explores new forms blending Baroque heritage and pre-classical style. It is in this context that Joseph Haydn, born in 1732 in Lower Austria, makes a name for himself at the court of the Esterházy princes in present-day Hungary. He experiments with refined orchestral formulas, structures his symphonies in 4 movements, and develops the string quartet, a genre that grows in popularity in the second half of the 18th century. His music marks the transition from the Gallant style to early classicism, thanks to his sense of form, balance, and melody. On the eve of 1756, Mozart's birth year, Haydn remains one of the many musicians in an era eager for virtuosity, but his innovations paved the way for the emergence of a new musical language. In popular circles, music celebrates harvests, accompanies agricultural work, religious processions, or entertains in taverns. The instruments are more rudimentary, and musical expression is often improvised. Traditions vary by region. Northern Germany, Bavaria, Bohemia, or Hungary have different dances and repertoires, reinvented from generation to generation. Court musicians sometimes draw inspiration from these tunes to renew their style. Itinerant musicians transport melodies and works between courts, while the spread of handwritten scores remains limited to cultured circles close to the elites. These demographic, artistic, political, and economic dynamics intersect in a bubbling Europe. Wars rage on, but ideas progress, technology evolves, and global exchanges intensify. Families of musicians settle in the small courts. The merchant bourgeoisie grows. Colonial empires clash on several continents, while living conditions remain profoundly unequal. Doctors question blood circulation and hygiene, and the countryside remains paced by harvests, famines, and weather. At great fairs, merchants and adventurers exchange fabrics, foodstuffs, and jewelry, while spreading rumors and tales of battle. In salons, nobles and philosophers envision a new world guided by reason and scientific observation, while in churches, the faithful still listen to priests' sermons, often wary of the winds of modernity. In the autumn of 1755, Lisbon is devastated by an earthquake followed by a tsunami, causing an immense shock in mentalities and fueling philosophical reflections on providence and the injustice of nature. Everywhere, technological progress elicits admiration and concern. In the English countryside, mechanical spinning mills replace traditional labor, while in France, some manufacturers draw inspiration from British processes. The rise of merchant capitalism combined with feudal structures creates a complex assembly where neither fully dominates. As the decade progresses, no one suspects that in January 1756, in an ecclesiastical principality at the foot of the Alps, a child is born into the family of a violinist in the service of an archbishop. Royal dynasties, patrons, thinkers, and engineers engage vigorously, publishing treatises on the forces of steam, discussing military codes, fuming over satirical pieces, or marveling at anatomical discoveries. Boats set sail for the East Indies to colonize new trading posts, while peasant misery mingles with the splendor of the court. Italian operas triumph in Vienna and Dresden, then cross France to reach Parisian theaters. Amid military confrontations, scientific advances, linguistic diversity, and religious partition, Europe from 1750 to 1760 oscillates between the Ancien Regime and modernity in a bustling environment that prepares for the emergence of a prodigy still unknown to the general public. Salzburg, before Wolfgang's birth, was an important ecclesiastical principality at the heart of the Holy Roman Empire. Governed by an archbishop prince, it stood out for its religious and civil status. The archbishop ruled as a monarch, directing the government, collecting taxes, and promoting cultural or artistic life according to his preferences and alliances. The highest administrative positions bore the mark of ecclesiastical authority, and the capital was dominated by Hohensalzburg Fortress, perched on a rocky promontory. In the 18th century, this fortress symbolized the archbishop's supremacy and the prosperity derived from the salt mines, the major resource that gave the city its name. The archbishop's function followed a strict protocol, and successive archbishops consolidated their prestige through architecture, arts, and court music. Religious processions marked the liturgical seasons, and the splendor of worship impressed the population. Salzburg remained modest compared to Vienna or Munich, but the density of shops, patrician residences, and churches gave the city a character that was both meditative and active. It attracted composers, instrumentalists, and young prodigies seeking protection. The musical activity, encouraged by the archbishop, required a constant stream of organists, violinists, singers, and chapel masters. It was in this religious setting that the Mozart family integrated and thrived. Leopold Mozart, Wolfgang's father, was born on November 14, 1719, in Augsburg, Bavaria, into a modest family. His father, Johann Georg Mozart, was a bookbinder. The third child, Leopold, exhibited a keen interest in music early on, learning the violin and trumpet while continuing his primary and secondary studies. Starting in 1737, he attended Salzburg University for philosophy and theology, but his passion for music led him to interrupt his studies to pursue a career at the court. By the 1740s, he became known as a talented violinist within the Archbishop's musical staff, participating in liturgical celebrations and court concerts, ensuring financial stability and reputation. Parallel to this, Leopold developed a vocation as a pedagogue, training musicians for religious services and official entertainments. He advised, corrected, and explained instrumental technique to young novices. In 1756, the year of Wolfgang's birth, he published his Versuch einer gründlichen Violinschule, a treatise on the fundamental principles of violin playing, quickly considered a reference text. Written in German, it covered the holding and handling of the instrument, intonation, musicality, ornamentation, and interpretation, offering methodological reflections for teachers and practical examples for self-taught individuals or enlightened amateurs. The treatise went beyond violin instruction by discussing harmony, proper execution, and ear training, a testament to the importance Leopold placed on the intellectual aspect of musical practice. While settling permanently in Salzburg, Leopold Mozart met Anna Maria Pertl, born on December 25, 1720. From a background sensitive to music, she had a good ear and shared a love for singing, also appreciating the arts and city sociability. The couple married on November 21, 1747. Several children were born, some of whom died at a young age, but two survived. Maria Anna, nicknamed Nannerl, born on July 30, 1751, and Wolfgang Amadeus. Before the birth of his son, family life intertwined music, religious obligations, and civil events in a modest home frequented by musicians, students, and visitors interested in Leopold's pedagogy. Nannerl showed early aptitude on the keyboard and harpsichord, organ, or clavichord, learning to decipher scores and interpret increasingly elaborate pieces. Leopold showcased her at court gatherings or bourgeois meetings. The young girl quickly absorbed fingering, polyphony, Baroque subtleties, and the emerging Galant style. Chapel masters noted her ability to play complex works correctly despite her young age, prompting admiration and astonishment. Nannerl's education wasn't confined to the home. She attended religious services, listened to choirs, organs, and violins, and was exposed to several languages. German was the main language, but Italian expressions circulated with musicians, and French appeared in diplomatic and social exchanges. The Mozart household was thus steeped in a multinational environment. Catholicism structured the family life. Rites, sacraments, processions, ceremonies, and daily prayers reinforced spiritual awareness. Leopold was interested in emerging intellectual debates while remaining cautious toward the archbishop. Anna Maria oversaw the children's religious education while embracing the cultural influences her husband brought home. The cosmopolitan nature of Salzburg was reflected in its music. The archbishop sought to improve the court orchestra with musicians from distant regions, bringing a mix of styles from late Baroque to the Galant style, a precursor to Viennese classicism. Court performances combined violin, oboe, flute, and voice. Anna Maria conveyed her impressions to Nannerl, who observed the performers and strengthened her interest in the keyboard. Before Wolfgang's arrival, the Mozart family was already recognized in Salzburg's musical circles for their playing quality and dedication to the religious institution. In the mid-18th century, life in Salzburg unfolded to the rhythm of bells and gatherings in squares. Merchants, modest synagogues for the few tolerated Jewish families, and guilds dotted the city. Sanitary conditions remained fragile due to endemic diseases like smallpox. Salzburg used its salt trade revenues to bolster its infrastructure, paved streets, a dynamic market, and frequented taverns. At night, candle or lantern lighting gave the city a warm or eerie aspect, depending on the location. For a young girl like Nannerl, this world shaped by faith and festivity offered music as a passport to fame. The visits from the Hagenauer family, close friends and owners of the Mozart's house, reinforced the family atmosphere. Thanks to their contacts with international merchants, the family had access to certain products from abroad. Leopold inquired about French customs, music in Italian courts, and the political developments of the Kingdom of Prussia. Anna Maria sometimes received small presents like fabrics or sweets. These occasions broadened their understanding of geographical and cultural diversity, which was rare among most city dwellers. In this environment where music and religion dominated, Leopold was a central figure. Attached to the ecclesiastical hierarchy, he sought to advance his career, knowing that progression depended on the goodwill of the archbishop. Even before Wolfgang's birth, he knew that Salzburg, nestled in its mountains, was not a major center like Vienna or Dresden. To make his children or his teaching methods known, he would have to travel, confront the best performers, and build a network beyond the Bavarian borders. This aspiration coexisted with the link to the material security of the church. Anna Maria, more sedentary, preferred the proximity of churches and the convenience of a familiar community. The birth of new children and family turning points would nevertheless alter this balance. Maria Anna Pertl, the mother, played an essential emotional role. She managed the household logistics, oversaw religious education and Nannerl's morale, and handled money when Leopold was occupied with his musical obligations. The family accounts show expenses for clothing, heating, food, and, to some extent, music. Anna Maria also participated in the artistic life, singing, discussing the accuracy of a note or the beauty of a tone. Her sensitivity and attentive ear were an asset to Leopold, as was her ability to balance artistic enthusiasm with financial realities. During the publication of Leopold's violin treatise in 1756, she encouraged him, contributing positively to the family's reputation. Between the ages of 5 and 8, Nannerl participated in a rich socio-religious microcosm. Her father's insights into his students, sometimes brilliant, sometimes laborious, motivated or amused her. The visitors who passed through the Mozart's door made her aware of the diversity of accents, manners, and dress styles, comparing the French aristocracy to Bavarian bourgeoisie. She understood the importance of appearances in an ecclesiastical principality, where everyone sought to win the archbishop's favor by wearing elegant clothes and displaying pious behavior. Leopold repeated that musicians must care for their posture and appearance, as they represented the court and the archbishop during services and ceremonies. In this strict context, the lightness of the music contrasted with the solemnity of grand liturgies, and Nannerl perceived this dual nature, the demands of sacred music and the freshness of lighter pieces. The training was not limited to instrumental practice. Leopold taught her theory, solfège, and the basics of counterpoint, believing that a good musician needed to understand the structure of works. Anna Maria contributed to the acquisition of household skills and social life, preparing Nannerl to become a cultured wife, capable of shining in salons and possibly giving music lessons. In Salzburg, few women excelled at the keyboard. Leopold envisioned a form of notoriety for his daughter, despite the conventions of the time that did not encourage musical careers for women. Family discussions revolved around faith, cathedral sermons, and news from Vienna, where Maria Theresa reigned. Salzburg, an ecclesiastical principality, had unequal relations with the imperial court. For Leopold, navigating between local powers in the Habsburg Empire was strategic. Aligning with the right side could open paths to promotion, while choosing the wrong alliance could be costly. Anna Maria dreamed of discovering Vienna, and Nannerl, still a child, mingled these stories with her imagination, already sensing the allure of travel. Her father's autographs and exercise books lived in the same space of curiosity, imbued with a timid ambition to go further. Leopold's ambition was reflected in his attention to contemporary composers such as Georg Philipp Telemann, Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach, and Joseph Haydn, keeping himself informed of new musical directions. The cultured circles of Salzburg occasionally organized discussions on sacred music, solemn masses, secular music, and Italian opera. A small network of music lovers exchanged manuscripts, copied scores, and made arrangements. Leopold sometimes collected scores from elsewhere to analyze them and look for techniques to pass on to Nannerl. Anna Maria encouraged these studies, and, when she heard Leopold play a new sonata, shared her impressions and preferences. Although she did not have her husband's training, her artistic sensitivity allowed her to instinctively judge the beauty of a phrase or the balance of harmonic progression. In the household, German was spoken every day, but Leopold wanted his daughter to master some basics of Italian and French, essential for moving in European artistic circles. Italian dominated opera, and French was prevalent in diplomatic and literary spheres. This aim was for an accomplished musician to be able to communicate with patrons in Milan, Paris, or London. Correspondences show that Leopold had a command of French that was acceptable, sometimes awkward, but understandable. Salzburg nobility circles willingly inserted French phrases for refinement, while Anna Maria relied on her social skills and sense of hospitality. Franciscan or Benedictine priests and monks often visited the Mozart household, primarily to discuss sacred music. Organizing certain masses required strings, singers, and organists, and Leopold was professionally involved. These clergymen sometimes talked with Anna Maria and encouraged Nannerl when they heard her play, passing on their praises to the archbishop. The reputation of a child prodigy was slowly being built, even before Wolfgang appeared. These churchmen, trained in monasteries with their own musical traditions, recognized the extraordinary potential of Nannerl, guided by a knowledgeable father and an attentive mother. While the Mozart dynasty was not yet illustrious, they represented a respected family in Salzburg. Some nobles and bourgeois boasted of having met Nannerl or discussed Leopold's violin method, or of having attended a musical evening. Others remained skeptical about the ambitions of this violinist educator and his offspring. Yet, in this genteel environment, local reputation already served as a stepping stone for Leopold, determined to perfect Nannerl's training and consolidate his own status at the ecclesiastical court, with the hope of climbing the ranks of the archbishop's musical staff. Anna Maria remained aware of the risks of too marked an ambition. A disgrace, a change of archbishop, or an economic crisis could jeopardize their projects. The premature death of children in the years preceding Wolfgang's birth reminded them of life's fragility. Nonetheless, the couple remained confident in Providence and attributed their successes to a form of divine election. The meticulous education of Nannerl reflected their desire to pursue a greater purpose than mere bourgeois life. The manuscripts, exercises, and impromptu auditions indicated that music would not just be social entertainment. In this context, the Mozart dynasty was preparing to welcome a promising new element without suspecting the upheaval Wolfgang would bring. On January 27, 1756, in Salzburg, the capital of an ecclesiastical principality governed by an archbishop, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart was born. Salzburg was not the grandest of European cities, but its musical influence offered many opportunities. The Hagenauer House, at number 9 Getreidegasse, housed Leopold Mozart, a violinist and composer in the service of the archiepiscopal court. Its owner, Johann Lorenz Hagenauer, was a family friend. Several accounts report that at the baby's first cry, the city's carillon began to chime, an anecdote interpreted as a premonitory sign. From the moment Wolfgang opened his eyes, music seemed to accompany him. Early on, the child thrived in an environment conducive to musical discoveries. Salzburg boasted a vibrant cultural life, thanks to religious and civic events. Liturgical ceremonies, richly adorned with music, inspired local composers. Musicians from Italy, southern Germany, or Vienna created a fertile artistic melting pot. Leopold Mozart, then in his 30s, played the violin in the court orchestra, composed sacred and instrumental works, and provided musical education to young nobles. Anna Maria watched over her offspring, having already lost several young children. The siblings were composed of Maria Anna, nicknamed Nannerl, and the newborn Wolfgang. From the very first weeks, music accompanied the child, with the proximity of instruments and Nannerl's curiosity stimulating his sensory awakening. Nannerl, 5 years older, was already asserting herself as a little prodigy at the keyboard. Under Leopold's tutelage, she mastered scales, arpeggios, and simple tunes. Musical practice was experienced collectively. Leopold organized small sessions to assess his daughter's progress. Wolfgang, at first too young to understand, absorbed the atmosphere enthusiastically. He began to tap on the keyboard, producing first awkward, then correct sounds. Before the age of 3, he was able to identify musical intervals and reproduce simple themes by ear. Visitors recounted with amazement his ease at learning new patterns from the crib, a curiosity quite extraordinary. Around 1759, Wolfgang, barely 3 years old, showed very early auditory and motor skills. His father, Leopold, believed that musical education should balance discipline and creative enthusiasm. Aware of the limits and strengths of such a young brain, he offered small, playful exercises, alternating between free explorations and meticulous reproduction of musical phrases. Little Wolfgang retained everything, played everything he heard, and even used his father's violin to explore sounds. In 1760, at 4 years old, Wolfgang surprised his father during a family meal by reproducing on the violin a melody he had heard earlier in the day. Leopold noticed that the child immediately transposed intervals when changing the key, confirming an almost infallible ear. From that moment, he gradually strengthened his son's structured training while balancing physical and mental effort. All right. Nannerl, his sister, became Wolfgang's first teacher model. She served as a concrete benchmark thanks to her technical level, playing a few concertos and challenging pieces. Wolfgang mimicked her posture, gestures, and finger positions, repeating passages with her or showing her his creations. This sibling complicity allowed the child to progress in a relaxed atmosphere, where imitation and play facilitated learning. Leopold Mozart, driven by profound paternal love, saw no limits to his son's progress. Far from being a tyrannical father, he fostered musical practice methodically, drawing inspiration from his violin treatise published in 1756, the year of Wolfgang's birth. It detailed the accuracy of the left hand, the bow stroke, and musicality, applying similar principles to the keyboard, regular rhythm, fluid touch, and awareness of musical structure. His experience at the Salzburg court had accustomed him to rehearsing and clearly commenting on scholarly works. According to accounts, He adjusted the duration of lessons to the child's concentration level, alternating moments of play and freedom, making each potential moment a musical exercise if Wolfgang wished. This method, nurtured by a benevolent family atmosphere, made Mozart an emerging composer almost before he grasped the complexity of his gift. Around 1761, at 5 years old, he began to jot down scraps of scores under his father's watch. The child understood musical notation and wanted to reproduce his mental ideas. Leopold checked, corrected, and taught him to formalize his ideas while giving him freedom. It was in this fertile ground that Mozart's first minuets, later catalogued K1 to K5, were born. These keyboard pieces, relatively simple technically but inventive, testified to the child's exceptional precocity and adhered to the binary form of the fashionable Galant style, suited for social dance. Seeing such a young composer respect this structure while infusing his melodies left Leopold amazed and aware of the need to protect this artistic flame. The minuets K1-5, composed between 1761 and 1762, hold considerable historical value today. Musicologists have noted that despite their simplicity, these miniatures already contain traits of the Mozartian soul: melodic fluidity, harmonic clarity, and a sense of play between dominant and principal tonality. Certainly, the future genius is not yet complete, but the child understood the basic mechanisms of composition, sometimes with suggestions or corrections from Leopold. However, testimonials show that Wolfgang found unexpected melodic ideas on his own, which he put on paper, an exceptional fact in the history of music. Myths have sometimes presented Leopold as a despot, imposing endless days of practice. However, he structured the learning while preserving the child's health and energy, as evidenced by his letters and his attitude towards Nannerl. Anna Maria, the mother, also ensured to limit keyboard time when Wolfgang was tired or too capricious. This parental wisdom fostered the harmonious development of his musical genius. Mozart's daily life did not revolve solely around music. He indulged in games, disguises, reading, and budding writing. He explored the gardens, accompanied his father to the market, and observed public processions and fanfares. He loved to vocally reproduce surrounding sounds, merchant tunes, the clatter of hooves, or mass airs. Walks along the banks of the Salzburg immersed him in landscapes that would nourish his childhood memories. Despite the sometimes harsh alpine winters and recurring childhood illnesses, Wolfgang was preserved and able to develop his talent in health. Wolfgang's rapid progress, reported by Leopold in his letters, began to pique interest beyond the family circle. The Archbishop of Salzburg, Sigismund von Schrattenbach, had heard of Leopold's musical skills and showed amused curiosity about the young boy. During small court events, Wolfgang and Nannerl showcased their talents before ecclesiastical dignitaries and high officials, playing four hands and improvising motifs. For the time, such a high level in precocious children was unprecedented. The reputation of the Mozart siblings developed in the Salzburg musical sphere, and Leopold envisioned broader prospects for his children. The family circle sometimes expanded with the arrival of relatives or friends, fostering exchanges of repertoires, scores, and ideas about education. Leopold gladly listened to foreign practices and invited musicians to play with the family, give lessons, or comment on works. Wolfgang thus heard varied styles: Italian sacred music, German concert airs, French sonatas. He absorbed and reproduced these impressions in his keyboard improvisations. This exposure to a wide panorama of musical traditions sustainably fueled his genius. Some visitors reported a mischievous Wolfgang, turning music into theatrical play. An anecdote tells of him improvising a comedic minuet in front of Austrian dignitaries, overplaying a fake seriousness, and giving Nannerl a conspiratorial wink. This ease in communication surprised an audience accustomed to obedient and discreet children. Wolfgang shone with his sociability and early love of the stage, while Leopold oscillated between pride and fear of misconduct, noting that the audience appreciated his talents. This stage play was already the sketch of a dramatic sensibility he would later deploy in his operas. In 1762, the plan for more ambitious travels began to emerge to showcase the children's talents and establish the family's reputation. Before leaving, Leopold ensured that Wolfgang and Nannerl had a solid repertoire and sufficient discipline for the foreign nobility. Collective practice sessions refined interpretation, stage manners, and physical poise. Wolfgang acquired new endurance, being able to hold a concert of half an hour or more, chaining keyboard pieces, improvisations, and demonstrations of perfect pitch. Leopold recorded his progress in writing to testify later in aristocratic circles. Wolfgang was enthusiastic about discovering other horizons, even though his age cast doubts on his ability to endure long journeys. The reflection on the young prodigy's education continued. Leopold wondered how far to push the child in demanding compositions. At 5 or 6 years old, Wolfgang was reading simple scores and grasping the rudiments of counterpoint. Treatises on harmony and composition seemed too dense for his age, and Leopold favored an intuitive approach, gradually introducing concepts of music theory and harmonic movement. Wolfgang enjoyed experimenting with new harmonies, sometimes asking Nannerl, "How does it sound if I make this chord?" The two children laughed as they discovered dissonant sequences, while Leopold explained the underlying theory. Other myths surround this period. It is said that Wolfgang attempted to compose a duo for violin and keyboard, transposing the melody in several keys. This anecdote shows his interest in modulation and experimentation. When Leopold showed an unprecedented chord progression, Wolfgang sought to combine it with a melodic line. Small drafts, sometimes crossed out, testify to his first ideas, still clumsy, but already full of initiative. The role of Nannerl, often minimized, should not be underestimated. She served as a mirror and accomplice in every discovery. By playing fragments or scales, she stimulated Wolfgang to imitate, vary, or reproduce the notes. This fraternal dynamic fed the liveliness of one and the demand of the other. Nannerl, already experienced, set an example that Wolfgang strove to reach, while she herself progressed through the emulation provoked by her brother. This mutual emulation was a valuable pedagogical lever, encouraged by Leopold. By the end of 1762, Wolfgang played the keyboard with surprising assurance for his age, and his first minuets heralded an unprecedented creative activity. The city of Salzburg, under the archbishop, gave music a central place, while Leopold accompanied his son's musical awakening step by step, and Nannerl served as model and guide. Leopold's methods combined rigor and kindness, allowing him to demand much while respecting the child's physical and emotional limits. Although myths suggest he was already composing sonatas at 4 years old, the minuets K1-5 show his first steps in composition and already contain his sense of melody, balance of forms, and characteristic boldness. Between 1756 and 1762, Mozart's childhood took shape in an intense musical and family environment. Born in Salzburg on Getreidegasse, he grew up surrounded by the sounds of the cathedral and court life. From the age of 3, he played the keyboard by ear and astonished his father with his accuracy on the violin. At 5, he composed his first minuets, which Leopold transcribed. Nannerl actively participated in his education, setting an example and encouraging him. Leopold, through his violin treatise, provided a solid framework for his children's progress while respecting the element of play and curiosity. Mozart's story is not reduced to the image of a solitary prodigy. These years illustrate the strength of a united family environment where art and transmission are part of everyday life. While other children were just beginning to learn to read, Wolfgang composed small pieces for the harpsichord under his father's watchful eye. The servant Bethlehem recounted his joy in playing and repeating even in the darkness, guided by his ear. The Hagenauer house and life in the Principality constituted an ideal nursery for his musical sensitivity. Many myths persist, like the city clock or the inflexible father. The reality, according to letters, testimonies, and scores, shows a human story made of fumbling and family joys. The minuets K1-5 already announced the melodic grace and lively inspiration that would characterize Mozart. At 6, he was but a little prodigy boy, whose reputation was beginning to spread beyond the walls of Salzburg, playing his compositions privately and inspiring admiration and wonder. At the beginning of the year 1762, when Wolfgang was only 6 years old, the Mozart family left Salzburg for a musical tour across Europe. Leopold, confident in his son's early genius, wanted to make his talents known to the courts and aristocratic circles of the major cities. The preparations were demanding, renting a sturdy carriage, packing clothes, sheet music, and instruments, and planning for sustenance during the journeys. Anna Maria, the mother, and Nannerl, nicknamed Nannerl, a brilliant pianist, accompanied Wolfgang for duets and demonstrations. The frequent stops were used to rest the horses and give small impromptu concerts in the palaces of the local nobility. Leopold kept a precise record of expenses, aware that their income depended on the goodwill of the princes and aristocrats they met. Under sometimes hostile skies, the carriage set off for Vienna, the first major stop. The Habsburg capital was an essential cultural center. Impressing Empress Maria Theresa would secure young Wolfgang a reputation that could facilitate subsequent stops. The journey, though short in kilometers, was extended by winter conditions and musical pauses. Each evening, the family settled into a modest inn or with a contact of Leopold's, searching for patrons or enthusiasts willing to listen to the prodigy. In Vienna, the imperial court was a lavish world where Wolfgang was not intimidated. Protocol required proper presentation, wearing fine clothes, and securing slots to perform before the imperial family. Leopold secured invitations thanks to his connections from Salzburg. Wolfgang notably met Archduchess Marie Antoinette. A famous anecdote mentions a slippery carpet. Wolfgang stumbled and was helped up by Marie Antoinette's hand. Fascinated by his talent, the nobles admired his precision, his ease of improvisation, and his musical memory. The Viennese evenings brought some gifts, promises of support and applause. Leopold saw in this the confirmation of his strategy, pursuing success to forge a European reputation. When the Viennese period ended, the Mozarts continued their journey to Munich, seeking new patrons and giving small performances in the private salons of the high nobility. The evenings alternated between concerts and receptions, with Wolfgang playing violin or harpsichord concertos, sometimes accompanied by Nannerl. Leopold managed every detail, from stage design to the selection of works, to capture the attention of a demanding audience. Daily sustenance remained a concern. Staying in good conditions was expensive, and not all courts covered their expenses. Wolfgang's energy and Leopold's tenacity, however, opened new doors. After Munich, they headed to Stuttgart, where the family encountered a cultured audience keen on novelties. Private concerts followed one another, sometimes interrupted by official ceremonies. Leopold exchanged with local musicians to learn about trendy styles and introduce his children. Wolfgang, curious, absorbed German, French, and Italian musical influences. Reviews were laudatory, although some viewed him as a fleeting phenomenon. The family continued their journey west, already planning stays in Paris and London. Their journey then led them to Brussels, close to the Austrian possessions in the Netherlands. The city, lively and a commercial crossroads, gladly hosted the family's shows. Leopold relied on diplomatic relations to arrange official performances. Wolfgang gave several concerts, improvising from any tune he heard. Gazettes began to mention these prodigy children, bestowing increasing fame beyond the aristocratic circle. Leopold remained vigilant about everyone's health, as the winter was harsh and the journey exhausting, especially for such a young child. The overall success encouraged them to continue the journey. After Brussels, heading to Paris, the capital of the Kingdom of France, where the passion for court music promised great opportunities. When the family arrives in Paris at the beginning of 1764, it is an initiatory rite for any musician wishing to break through. The city, with its opera, literary salons, and nobility eager for shows, exerts a strong attraction. The Mozarts discover a complex society where courtiers, philosophers, financiers, and artists mingle, and where the new ideas of the Enlightenment circulate. Wolfgang's appearance causes a sensation. Private concerts are held at patrons' homes or in open salons, sometimes attended by writers or encyclopedists. Leopold, proficient in French, negotiates satisfactory fees and obtains recommendations for the family. The Parisian press publishes rave reviews. Wolfgang, eager to please, tries out a few phrases in French, encouraged by Leopold. Paris also allows Wolfgang to expand his repertoire and confront different styles. The French appreciate the clarity of melodic lines and the lightness of orchestral entertainments. Wolfgang and Nannerl play on Parisian harpsichords, different from those in Austria or Bavaria, which sharpens his ear and forces him to adapt his playing. Some professional musicians, fearing for their position, watch with a critical eye, and some jealousy arises around Leopold's strategies. The stay in Paris proves fruitful in popularity and honors. After Paris, the family prepares for London. Crossing the English Channel requires caution and effort. Leopold is concerned about the health of his relatives. Despite everything, the prospect of London under George III, a major center of European musical life, is too enticing. The family embarks at Calais, crosses the sea, and arrives in England. The audience there discovers a child whose reputation precedes him. The royal circles, fond of Italian operas and English Baroque, organize a meeting with King George III and Queen Charlotte. Wolfgang performs on the harpsichord and violin, answering the king's questions about various composers with ease. In London, Wolfgang develops an admiration for Georg Friedrich Handel, a German composer naturalized English, who died in 1759, whose oratorios are regularly performed. Leopold explains to him Handel's historical importance and his influence on the late Baroque style. Wolfgang also meets Johann Christian Bach, the youngest son of Johann Sebastian Bach, nicknamed the London Bach, who merges the Italian gallant style with German tradition. Bach introduces Wolfgang to the art of the sonata and refined turns, while Wolfgang impresses Bach with his sight reading and improvisations. During this period, Wolfgang composes his first symphonies under Leopold's supervision and with the help of Johann Christian Bach. For a child of 7 to 8 years old, he masters form, harmonies, and orchestration. The London public is enthralled by his talent as a creator and performer. The concerts mix harpsichord, violin, and first symphonies. The press praises this wonder of nature and the musical education he received. The commissions and paid performances ensure the family a sufficient income. However, Wolfgang contracts smallpox. Fever, eruptions, and fatigue force concerts and invitations to be interrupted. Traditional treatments and rest allow for a gradual recovery. The family must extend their stay, despite risks and costs. Once recovered, Wolfgang regains his enthusiasm for composing and improvising, sensing the importance of expanding his abilities and being appreciated in influential circles. When the family finally chooses to leave London, England retains a vivid memory of these prodigious children. Leopold has accumulated scores, letters of recommendation, and reflections on the evolution of musical styles encountered. Between 1762 and 1765, Wolfgang becomes a true musical citizen of Europe, even though he is not yet 9 years old. The return to the continent is arduous. Storms at sea, a tight budget, and the effects of bovine plague on livestock disrupting supply and trade. Provisions become scarce and costly, impacting living expenses, while Leopold notes the difficulties in finding quality food. Despite these constraints, Wolfgang resumes his musical routine, drawing inspiration from daily atmospheres, conversations with Nannerl, and sheet music he flips through. He still marvels at Bach and Handel. Leopold encourages this momentum, convinced that exposure to different traditions and influences is the best school to develop Wolfgang's genius. Each stop allows them to test the child on new repertoires and introduce him to local masters. Meetings with the aristocracy and intellectual elites help forge his reputation. Expenses remain a constant concern. In September 1765, the family is unsure if they will return to Salzburg with enough savings to offset the initial investment. Leopold remains convinced that investing in the education of Wolfgang and Nannerl while building a network of patrons will pay off. Towards the end of 1765 and throughout 1766, the Mozarts travel across the Holy Roman Empire and some neighboring territories, juggling between prestigious invitations and financial imperatives. Sometimes, they have to wait in a city due to a lack of funds until a concert proposal arises. Other princely courts pay immediately, attracted by Wolfgang's talent. Leopold plans the next steps: Mannheim, Frankfurt, or The Hague, where reigning families can offer material support. Meanwhile, Anna Maria manages the domestic logistics to ensure that Wolfgang and Nannerl maintain a daily rhythm between music, meals, and rest. The music notebooks fill with new pieces, drafts of symphonies, concertos, and sung airs that Wolfgang refines whenever he gets the chance. Over the months, the local press in several cities reports on the adventures of this family of musicians, piquing the curiosity of readers. Some articles talk about Wolfgang's exploits, others about his illness and recovery. Most accounts confirm the authenticity of his talent, especially since the echoes are consistent from one city to the next. Nobles who have heard him play report his extraordinary ability to improvise, his accuracy, and his agility on the keyboard. At a time when long journeys are rare, this family grand tour fascinates and amazes. The Mozarts prefer to travel, captivating a dispersed audience from London to Vienna, from Paris to Munich, to build lasting recognition. This life of travel involves sacrifices. Leopold gauges the fragility of their financial balance. A medical setback, rising prices, or a region in agricultural crisis can compromise the journey. Wolfgang, still a child, feels the lack of roots and nostalgia for Salzburg, even if his enthusiasm for music compensates part of this uprooting. The material conditions are often rudimentary, and the difficult roads extend the itineraries. Each concert or salon remains a moment of grace, where music unites the family, eclipsing concerns related to political crises or wars. Despite the international tensions of this decade, notably the 7 Years' War that ended in 1763 and whose consequences still weigh on trade, the Mozarts avoid unstable regions by constantly adapting their itinerary. Leopold identifies safe routes, avoids costly customs posts, and capitalizes on festive or religious events that require musicians. Profits remain modest, but sufficient for Wolfgang to continue astonishing the crowds. Meanwhile, the child develops a pianistic and violin technique unmatched for his age, and the trials of the road strengthen his artistic temperament. By the end of 1766, the human and musical achievements are considerable. Wolfgang has played for sovereigns, princesses, dukes, and barons, but also for bourgeois circles. He has learned to adjust his style according to the countries, collaborate with established composers, explore various instruments, and compose his first symphonies. Meetings with the Austrian monarchy, French nobility, or the London scene confirm that Europe is a vast cultural puzzle where musical language forms a universal bond. Leopold documents each step in his notebook, noting receipts, pieces performed, and cross-influences. Nannerl also perfects herself, and in private, they continue to play four hands in inn rooms. The trunks, increasingly heavy, contain sheet music, manuscripts, and clothes offered by patrons. Between 1762 and 1766, this grand tour forges the legend of Wolfgang. His name circulates in Germany, France, England, and Italy. He is nicknamed the Little Keyboard Wizard, or the Miracle Child. The gazettes broadcast his exploits from city to city. Through this journey, Wolfgang's candidacy for the status of a renowned musician seems irresistible as long as health and finances hold up. Europe witnesses the first steps of a figure who will profoundly mark history and whose trajectory will flourish well beyond these childhood performances. Between 1769 and 1773, the adolescent Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart embarks on a series of trips to Italy that mark a turning point in his artistic formation. Italy, the homeland of opera, attracts foreign musicians keen to train at the highest level. Accompanied by his father Leopold, Wolfgang travels through Verona, Milan, Bologna, Rome, and Naples. Each stop provides him with encounters, shows, and musical challenges, gradually forging his artistic identity. Mozart, already recognized as a prodigy, arouses admiration, curiosity, and sometimes jealousy. Encouraged by his father, he asserts himself in a world where competition is fierce and the public is demanding. In December 1769, at 13 years old, Wolfgang begins his first trip to Italy with Leopold, hoping to secure new contracts and broader recognition. In Verona, renowned for its musical traditions, he performs private concerts before the local nobility, dazzling with his virtuosity on the harpsichord and violin. The regional newspapers report his exploits. He discovers the Italian repertoire, notably the choirs and motets of the churches, and Leopold utilizes every moment to develop his critical ear and knowledge of the Italian style. Aristocrats and prelates take an interest in this young talent from Salzburg, paving the way for future commissions and collaborations. After Verona, the family heads to Milan, the capital of the duchy under Austrian rule, a dynamic artistic hub. Wolfgang plays before numerous patrons, discovers the opulence of aristocratic salons and opera seria, and attends performances at the Teatro Regio Ducale. He meets composers, singers, and performers, while Leopold strengthens diplomatic and artistic ties between Salzburg and Lombardy. Milan becomes a crossroads of learning and inspiration for the young Mozart. In 1770, Wolfgang travels to Bologna, known for its intense intellectual and musical life, to meet Padre Martini, a leading figure in counterpoint. The Accademia Philharmonica invites him to an impromptu counterpoint exam, and he impresses with the speed and accuracy of his responses, earning the privilege of being admitted. The encounter with Martini lays the foundation for his in-depth study of polyphony. The discovery of Rome, a spiritual center, is a significant moment of the journey. In 1770, after Bologna, Wolfgang and Leopold visit ancient monuments and the choirs of the Papal Chapel. At 14, Mozart attends a performance of Allegri's Miserere, a choral piece sung only during Holy Week in the Sistine Chapel, and manages to memorize every note. Once back at the inn, Mozart transcribes the Miserere score from memory, faithfully reproducing the voices and harmonic subtleties. This feat creates a stir in Rome, as Allegri's score was considered confidential and kept under lock and key by the papal choir. Pope Clement XIV, informed of this achievement, highlights Mozart's genius by decorating him with the Order of the Golden Spur, a rare honorary distinction. Beyond Rome, Mozart's journey extends to Naples, capital of the kingdom ruled by the Bourbon dynasty. The city, renowned for its conservatory and masters of bel canto, catches Leopold's attention, who wishes to introduce Wolfgang to the nuances of southern vocal music. In Naples, Mozart attends operas whose dramatic intensity and melodic richness impress him. The Italian courts compete for the best singers and composers, stimulating his creativity and allowing him to study singing techniques and the theatricality of local productions. These stays also provide Mozart the opportunity to compose his first operas for a discerning audience. The Milanese patron Karl Theodor, Elector of Bavaria, and other influential aristocrats believe the young musician can rival Italian masters. His fame grows rapidly, with each performance or concert showcasing his virtuosity and ease in composition. Despite the language barrier, the expectations of patrons, and the complex organization of theaters, he immerses himself in opera seria, drawing on local traditions to refine his style. The pinnacle of these journeys manifests with the composition and performance of two major operas, Mithridate, Re di Ponto, created for the 1770 carnival season in Milan, and Lucio Silla, premiered in Milan in 1772. Mithridate allows Mozart to demonstrate his ability to write for the greatest voices, with a libretto inspired by the King of Pontus and complex dramatic stakes. He overcomes challenges related to the casting, sometimes entrusted to renowned castrati, and the constraints of theater directors. Mithridate's premiere in December 1770 arouses keen curiosity from the Milanese public. The success of Mithridate consolidates Mozart's reputation and leads to the commission of Lucio Silla, which delves into ancient Rome and features the dictator Lucius Cornelius Sulla, performed by virtuoso singers. Despite rivalries among performers, censorship pressures, and the demands of patrons, the performance confirms Mozart's mastery in the lyrical art. Critics praise his ability to blend vocal complexity with dramatic contrasts, anticipating the modernity of his later works. Parallel to his triumphs in Milan, Mozart's close relationship with Padre Martini and other Italian scholars profoundly shapes his musical language. Bologna, where he returns multiple times, serves as a study hub for the strict counterpoint inherited from the Renaissance tradition. Martini, recognized for his scholarship in musical theory, guides Mozart in assimilating the strict rules of multi-voice writing, foundational to the contrapuntal science found in his masses, complex symphonies, and operas. Studying ancient treatises, reading polyphonic works, and observing the work of local masters allow him to master the canon, the fugue, and other scholarly forms. In Italy, Mozart learns to combine melodic grace and analytical rigor. His operas reveal his ease in setting text to music, while his sacred and instrumental compositions already show a mastery of harmonic arcs and the balance between voices. Martini's teaching immerses Wolfgang in a reflection on the nature of music and the necessity to unite tradition and innovation. Mozart's ascent in Italy, however, encounters hurdles. Artistic and ecclesiastical circles are fraught with rivalries between local composers and foreign musicians. Leopold must negotiate each invitation to avoid offending any influential figure. Theater intrigues and financial expectations weigh on the family, as travel, accommodation, and rehearsals incur costs not always covered by receipts and subsidies. Despite these difficulties, Wolfgang's talent remains indisputable in the eyes of Italian audiences and critics. Honors multiply, such as the Order of the Golden Spur awarded for his virtuosity. This status opens up opportunities beyond Italy, with the musical circles of Vienna, Munich, or Paris, observing with interest the reception given to the young prodigy. These years spent in Italy already hint at the magnitude of Mozart's legacy, nourished by local tradition, academic rigor, and popular fervor, preparing the future flowering of his masterpieces. In 1773, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, then 17 years old, had to return to Salzburg, in present-day Austria, despite his frequent travels to make a name for himself in the great musical capitals. The pressure from his employer, Archbishop Hieronymus von Colloredo, compelled him to return to the familiar walls. For an audience accustomed to the halls of Vienna or Paris, Salzburg seemed modest, but the principality remained proud of its rich history. Mozart held the position of Concertmeister in the service of Colloredo, responsible for ensuring solemn ceremonies and conducting the Prince Archbishop's orchestra. In this court, where church and state were one, the musical function had an almost sacred dimension, but for the young composer, it was a gilded cage. He aspired to conquer international stages, experiment with new sounds, and live independently. Relationships with Colloredo were often stormy. Coming from a noble family from Friuli near Venice, the Archbishop sought to modernize his state and cut expenses, including those related to court music, which vexed Mozart used to the accolades of major capitals. Several accounts describe the tense atmosphere at the palace, where he had to comply with sometimes contradictory demands. During this period, Mozart composed divertimenti and concertos, perfecting his art while adhering to imposed conventions. The divertimenti, intended for court evenings, reflected the gallant aesthetic with light melodies and moderate contrasts, but the subtlety of harmonies and instrumental dialogues already betrayed his inventiveness. The concertos allowed him to showcase his talent as a soloist. In Salzburg, Michael Haydn, younger brother of Joseph, enjoyed a solid reputation as a composer and chapel master. His style, similar to his brother's but more conservative, partially influenced Mozart. The two men sometimes exchanged scores and discussed musical technique, fueling Mozart's desire to grow as an artist, despite the constrained court environment. Mozart remained curious and eager for discoveries. In 1777, he obtained permission to leave Salzburg to seek new employment. Accompanied by his mother, he traveled to Mannheim, an important musical center, where he met the Weber family, including Aloysia Weber, a talented young soprano who caught his attention and marked the beginning of a passionate and complicated relationship. In Mannheim, he discovered an orchestra renowned for its discipline and virtuosity, and a dynamic city focused on the arts. But his plans for stable employment failed, Promises of financial support remained vague, and his family's financial situation worsened, rendering his future uncertain. Aware that Mannheim would not offer him the hoped-for promotion, Mozart decided to go to Paris in 1778, hoping to reconnect with the success of his childhood and find patrons. The French capital, in the midst of a pre-revolutionary fervor, was a major intellectual and artistic crossroads. But reality proved complex, hampered by court intrigues, the changing tastes of the public, and competition. In Paris, the musical scene was marked by Italian influence and opera comique. The conditions for playing his symphonic compositions were strict, and he no longer benefited from the status of a child prodigy. The critics reflected a lack of understanding of his style and a reserve towards his creative fervor. He did, however, give some concerts praised for their originality without meeting the anticipated enthusiasm. The stay was marked by the death of Maria Anna Mozart, his mother, in July 1778, who fell ill a few weeks after their arrival. Deprived of support, Wolfgang experienced this loss harshly and had to announce the news to his father Leopold in Salzburg, feeling grief, guilt, and solitude. Despite this loss, he composed Symphony No. 31 in D major, known as Paris, created in June 1778, adapted to Parisian tastes with a prominent use of winds and rhythmic emphasis. The reviews were mixed. Some thought the work too daring, others praised its freshness and energy. However, the court did not offer him any remunerative position, and Mozart grew tired of constantly having to justify his aesthetic choices. He considered going to England, but the weight of debt, his father's health, and the lack of concrete support dissuaded him. In September 1778, he left Paris to return to Germany, then went back to Salzburg, where Leopold encouraged him to accept a secure position rather than hypothetical glory. Back in Salzburg, Mozart resumed his duties as Concertmeister under Colloredo's authority. The climate remained difficult. Tight budget, protocol requirements, and distrust weighed on musical creation. Yet, he composed numerous sacred and instrumental pieces, masses, litanies, and motets, introducing harmonic and rhythmic innovations within a conservative religious framework. In parallel, he wrote divertimenti, serenades, and concertos for violin and piano. His violin concertos Nos. 2-5, written around 1775, already show technical mastery and great sensitivity in slow movements. He favored the keyboard concerto, which allowed him to perform and engage directly with the orchestra. Despite the lack of immediate international recognition, these years in Salzburg shaped the Mozartian language, the foundation of his future creations. On a sentimental level, Mozart kept the memory of Aloysia Weber. When she moved to Munich for her singing career, he wrote to her regularly and tried to see her whenever possible. His letters reflected sincere love and clarity regarding the distance and professional obligations. Leopold Mozart encouraged Wolfgang to focus on his court work and not to get distracted. The tensions between father and son were increasing. Wolfgang demanded more freedom, while Leopold reminded him of his duties to the archbishop. With the death of Maria Anna, the family lost an essential emotional support. Numerous letters illustrate these frictions, blending advice, reprimands, and expressions of affection. Despite this, Mozart innovated. His pieces for violin and viola, some duos and serenades, created between 1776 and 1779, already demonstrate melodic fluidity and harmonic depth. Respecting the norms of the time, he integrated bold modulations, contrasts, and a pronounced dramatic sense. In contact with Salzburg musicians and the public, he tested different emotional registers, alternating between intimate and flamboyant styles. The international fame of Joseph Haydn aroused admiration and sometimes envy in Mozart. The epistolary exchanges show that he followed Haydn's career and wished to match this European audience. But in the protective yet restrictive shadow of Colorado, this ambition remained limited, and the frictions with the archbishop intensified. In this climate, Mozart wrote several works for choir and orchestra, like the Missa Brevis in C and the Missa Solemnis in C minor, combining religious fervor and technical mastery. The patrons appreciated the musical splendor, but Mozart remained ambivalent towards the church, respecting tradition while maintaining a free spirit, a trait marking his Salzburg creations. In 1779, he received the title of court and cathedral organist, a modest advancement complementing his existing roles and ensuring a slightly more stable income. He saw travel opportunities emerging, notably to Munich, to present a new opera, but Colorado's approval remained necessary. The late 1770s were thus a period of tensions and creative explorations for Mozart. In Salzburg, he perfected his skills, strengthening his musical identity. Yet, the grip of the court and Colorado's contradictory expectations foreshadowed a rupture. The frustrations, the desire to explore new horizons, and the ambition to assert himself on the European stage were beginning to materialize. In 1781, Mozart, aged 25, was still serving Archbishop Hieronymus von Colorado in Salzburg. Tensions were building as he sought more freedom. During a reception in the Grosser Saal, a heated altercation erupted. Hurt by Colorado's authoritarian remarks, Mozart decided to break with this ecclesiastical protectorate and left the court, aware that he was losing financial security. His father, Leopold, worried, but Mozart saw in Vienna, the capital under Emperor Joseph II, a unique chance to assert himself. He settled there to live off his talents as a composer, virtuoso pianist, and teacher, inventing his own strategies for musical livelihood without the intervention of a strict court. Barely settled, Mozart turned to subscription concerts, where patrons and music lovers paid in advance for several performances, thus offering a more stable income. There he conducted his symphonies, improvised on the piano, and presented new pieces, warmly received by an audience eager for virtuosity. Under the protection of enlightened aristocrats, he occupied various private venues, where direct contact with the orchestra and the audience delighted all participants. His music lessons to wealthy students supplemented his income. During this period, he composed several piano concertos, from number 9 to number 21, exploring the dialogue between soloist and orchestra, alternating graceful themes and dramatic passages, testing the technical inventiveness of the fortepiano, and refining the writing of wind instruments. Mozart's private life was evolving parallelly as he reunited with the Weber family in Vienna. He had known Aloysia, a soprano, but it was Constanze, born in 1762, who moved him. Leopold, who remained in Salzburg, disapproved of the hasty marriage, fearing the lack of stable income. Mozart defended his love and the importance of a stable union. In August 1782, he married Constanze at St. Stephen's Cathedral, despite his father's absence. The couple settled modestly, sharing artistic joys and financial worries. While discovering the demands of marriage, Mozart pursued his ambitions as an independent composer. In Vienna, he benefited from a cultured audience and the growing interest in the fortepiano, which was replacing the harpsichord in aristocratic salons. He experimented with a concerto, in which the orchestra was no longer a mere accompanist, but a partner to the soloist, exchanging themes and responses. Public concerts allowed him to play his works in front of paying spectators from the wealthy bourgeoisie, changing the status and remuneration of musicians. The piano concertos, composed between 1782 and 1784, particularly numbers 17 and 19, illustrate this blend of gallant elegance and expressive strength. Mozart also gained confidence as an impromptu conductor, leading from his keyboard while constantly worrying about his accounts. In search of influential supporters, he forged ties with the aristocracy to obtain dedications or occasional funding. Each patron valued his talent and facilitated the distribution of his scores, but these sponsorships remained fragile. The artist had to capture a paying audience to ensure his livelihood. He published several works in the form of piano and orchestra scores through subscription, allowing wealthy amateurs to acquire and perform them in Europe. This strategy increased his fame, despite irregular financial returns. At the same time, he gave lessons and participated in music academies, expanding his social network and opportunities. Mozart also immersed himself in Vienna's intellectual life, marked by the Enlightenment. He mingled with progressive minds, discussed philosophy and science, and frequented cafes and libraries. Sensitive to these ideas, he became interested in Freemasonry and joined a lodge in December 1784, where he met other artists and thinkers sharing the aspiration for an enlightened society. This affiliation sometimes reflected in his works through the integration of Masonic symbols and values. He cultivated several recreational passions. Billiards served as entertainment, occasionally with modest wagers, and card games added spice to a life balanced between professional obligations, social meetings, and worldly pleasures. Testimonies describe wild evenings where Mozart, after conducting a concert, relaxed with a circle of players. Yet he continued his musical commitments, composing quickly and refining several scores simultaneously. His Piano Concerto No. 21 in C major, completed in 1785 but sketched in 1784, exemplifies his gallant dramatic style. The orchestra often introduces a light melody interrupted by a more intense episode, establishing a dynamic dialogue that captivates the Viennese. Critics praise the formal originality, where Italian counterpoint married the melodic sense developed throughout his career. In this creative fervor, Constanze was a strong moral support, revisiting his inspirations, encouraging him, and managing concert logistics, despite financial fragility. Mozart did not limit himself to instrumental forms. Operas remained a major ambition, and Vienna was a suitable theater for new productions. Between 1781 and 1784, he focused on concert entertainments, taking advantage of the subscription vogue and his success as a performer. Cultured circles admired his ability to merge lightness with expressive power. Sometimes, he performed at patrons' homes in small ornate halls, bringing artist and audience closer together. The scores circulated throughout the city, copied or printed, granting Mozart growing notoriety. The couple could occasionally afford a more comfortable lifestyle, but stability remained precarious in the face of regular expenses, renting instruments, buying scores, and maintaining servants. Over the years, his reputation solidifies in the Viennese cultural sphere. Critics praise his piano concertos, combining melody and orchestral complexity, highlighting each solo section. The bourgeois audience sees it as refined entertainment, while the aristocracy boasts of having such a genius among them. Invited to social dinners, Mozart often improvises variations on themes requested by the attendees. On a personal level, the union with Constanze evolves with their financial ups and downs. To make ends meet, They sell some belongings and receive occasional support. Mozart values his creative freedom despite fluctuating income. In 1784, the pace of concerts intensifies. Mozart organizes several subscription series in different venues, including the Burg Theater and private salons, playing his new pieces or pianistic variations. His loyal audience expands to include officials, wealthy bourgeois, and minor nobility. The press echoes the fervor surrounding his evenings and the influx of spectators. The money collected is used to pay off debts, then to invest in printing his scores, allowing him to distribute his works across Europe, notably in Paris and London. These variable earnings maintain the household's instability, but strengthen his international career. His letters to Leopold show a composer fulfilled and proud of his Viennese success. Beyond music, Mozart is passionate about the exchange of ideas in Vienna. He attends philosophical debates, visits bookstores, and frequents cafes, places of intellectual and political encounters. When he's not at the billiard table or improvising, he welcomes musician friends to play chamber music. Constanze remains attentive and discreet, reassuring an occasionally anxious husband. Despite fluctuating finances, Mozart's boundless energy and refusal of any tutelage allow him to assert his autonomy and freely shape his art. He strengthens his reputation and enriches himself with musical and social experiences, hinting at an even more grandiose future. The years 1782 to 1787 mark a turning point in the career of Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, as his talent meets the recognition of the Viennese public and the interest of the imperial court. It is a period of intense creation, centered on opera, a form that Mozart elevates to an unprecedented level of sophistication. The official cap, once tied to patrons or the court of Salzburg, disappears in favor of his position as an independent composer. Opera becomes the main vector of his fame. In this context, the abduction from the Seraglio, the marriage of Figaro, and Don Giovanni are successively born, carried by the intellectual effervescence of the imperial court of Joseph II and the curiosity of a bourgeois public eager for novelty. These works reflect the trends of the time, whether they stem from the entourage of the Austrian nobility, the German public, or the craze for exotic sounds from the Ottoman Empire. In 1782, Mozart triumphs for the first time with a comic opera in German, Die Entführung aus dem Serail, translated into French as The Abduction from the Seraglio. This work, a sing-spiel alternating spoken dialogues and sung airs, is part of Joseph II's approach to promote a German national theater. Mozart composes this piece inspired by Turqueries, fanciful representations of Ottoman culture present in art and opera. The libretto, by Johann Gottlieb. Stephanie the Younger depicts Constanza and Belmonte confronting the Pasha Selim, magnanimous despite his apparent cruelty. The orchestra, equipped with Turkish percussion, cymbals, tambourine, triangle, imparts an oriental color that charms the court. The work is also impressive for the virtuosity of airs such as Martern aller Arten or O wie ängstlich. The final kindness of the Pasha underscores the aspiration to humanist ideals. Emperor Joseph II, present at the performance, is said to have praised Mozart while commenting on the alleged abundance of notes, giving rise to the legend of an imaginary rivalry between the sovereign and the composer. The success of The Abduction from the Seraglio in 1782 established Mozart's reputation in Vienna and expanded his audience. Freed from the constraints of Archbishop Colloredo of Salzburg, he navigated between the salons of the nobility and the stage of the national opera, balancing artistic prestige and creative freedom. He simultaneously composed several instrumental works, from piano concertos to string quartets, all while hoping for a new grand opera. At court, Italian-dominated opera seria, while German-speaking comic opera appeared more sporadically. Mozart sought a librettist capable of handling the Italian language and crafting comic or sentimental plots. Vienna became a major artistic center, attracting composers and singers with skilled printers and a wealthy audience receptive to lyrical experimentation. In this context, Mozart met librettist Lorenzo da Ponte, of Venetian origin, who was settled in Vienna after working at various Italian courts. Their connection was immediate, sharing a desire for witty, comedic, and psychologically profound plots. Their first joint project, Le Noces di Figaro, The Marriage of Figaro, came to life in 1786. The libretto adapted Beaumarchais' comedy, already controversial in France for its criticisms of the aristocracy and politically sensitive allusions. To avoid prohibition, da Ponte trimmed certain scenes or made them more subtle. Joseph II, keen on appeasing the nobility, was conciliatory thanks to the stature acquired by Mozart and da Ponte. The rehearsals for The Marriage of Figaro began in an enthusiastic and tense atmosphere. Enthusiastic, because Mozart saw the opportunity to further enhance the musical characterization of each character: Count Almaviva, weary and jealous; the Countess, melancholic and noble; Figaro, mischievous and a shrewd strategist; Susanna, quick-witted; and Cherubino, a love-struck adolescent. Tense, because the composer and the librettist had to deal with the troupe's demands, backstage intrigues, the singer's nerves, and financial pressures. Delays were not uncommon, and Mozart did not hesitate to write new pieces to highlight a performer. The premiere took place on May 1st, 1786, at the Burg Theater in Vienna. The audience, initially bewildered by the density of the score, enjoyed the liveliness of the music. Several numbers were encored, a sign of success. The court did not rush to acclaim the work, but Emperor Joseph II did not oppose it, constituting a tacit approval. In Prague, the work received a resounding triumph. The Bohemian capital had a vibrant musical life, supported by a literate aristocracy and a bourgeois public, eager for novelty. In the autumn of 1786, the work was played all over the city, in theaters as well as by amateur orchestras. The locals, less subjected to Viennese censorship, appreciated the social satire and the sparkling, warm score. Faced with this success, theater directors invited Mozart to supervise performances and commissioned a new opera from him. This climate of enthusiasm brought him not only the public's affection, but also substantial income thanks to additional concerts. In this context appeared Don Giovanni, performed for the first time at the Estates Theatre in Prague on October 29, 1787. The work is a dramma giocoso, blending comedy and drama, telling the story of the seducer Don Juan. Mozart and da Ponte's version goes beyond mere caricature. Don Giovanni is both captivating and terrifying. The plot revolves around Leporello, his servant who lists his female conquests; Donna Anna, grieving her father's death; Donna Elvira, an abandoned lover oscillating between hatred and compassion; Zerlina, a peasant girl seduced on her wedding day; and the Commendatore, whose statue triggers the fatal conclusion. The dramatic tension is served by a rich score, with wonderful ensembles like the Sextet of Act II, and memorable arias such as Fin c'è handal vino and Dalla sua pace. The work brilliantly marries the anxiety of the final damnation with scenes of romantic intrigue and comedy. One of the famous anecdotes concerns the overture. According to tradition, Mozart wrote it the night before the premiere, finishing the last measures while the orchestra was tuning. This rumor illustrates his speed of composition and his confidence in the Prague instrumentalists. Other sources specify that he already had some drafts in mind. The overture begins with deep and mysterious chords before switching to a nervous allegro, symbolizing the irony and seductive temperament of the hero, reflecting the mix of the tragic and the comic. During the performance on October 29, 1787, the score surprised with its contrasts. The cemetery scene where Leporello and Don Giovanni confront the statue of the Commendatore gave the audience chills, while some scenes provoked laughter, such as when Leporello complains about his master's whims or tries to escape Donna Elvira. The Prague spectators, already won over by The Marriage of Figaro, discovered the new maturity of Mozart, aged 31, capable of combining depth of emotion with whirlwind energy. Critics emphasized the density of the orchestration, the inventiveness of the vocal lines, and the ability of the music to highlight each situation. Da Ponte orchestrated a tense, dramatic progression, giving each character a rich and coherent psychological profile, while subtly commenting on society, authority, justice, and the links between social classes. The reception in Prague was triumphant, even though some stage proposals required adjustments over the performances, as was common at the time. The Prague version of Don Giovanni made a sensation. In Vienna on May 7, 1788, the reactions were more mixed. Some found the work dark or complex, while others saw it as a pinnacle of inventiveness, equaling The Marriage of Figaro. Emperor Joseph II would salute Mozart's mastery, but Vienna showed less enthusiasm. The Prague public, for its part, continued to show favor to Mozart. The success of Mozart in Da Ponte lies in the mix of dramatic registers. At the time, the tragic opera seria and the comic opera buffa were separated. In Don Giovanni, comedy and drama coexist. Leporello, disguised as Don Giovanni, the Commendatore's revenge, the contrast between humor and terror, form the pivot of a theatrical experience disconcerting for an audience accustomed to a clear division of genres. This ambivalence fascinates spectators and critics, alternating laughter and anxiety. Mozart, trained in Italy and Austria, relied on opera buffa while integrating opera seria with heroic characters and moral gravity. He used dark orchestral colorations, low strings, horns, and trombones, evoking supernatural forces. Da Ponte drew inspiration from the myth of Don Juan, Tirso de Molina, Molière, Goldoni, for a mixed libretto, accessible but scholarly, crafting accompanied recitatives to support the dramatic progression. Lighting and sets reinforced the latent danger around Don Giovanni. This revolution also manifests in the ensembles. From the first act, a trio intertwines Donna Anna, Donna Elvira, and Don Giovanni in a tangle of contradictory feelings. The final banquet, where Don Giovanni mocks morality before the spectral arrival of the Commendatore, astonishes with its grandiosity and macabre suddenness. The sextet of Act 2 masterfully exposes the different viewpoints, allowing multiple vocal lines to be followed around the same orchestral harmony, giving the impression of a social microcosm in full agitation. The importance of these innovations is evident in the testimony of contemporaries. Some writers, like Friedrich Schiller, were struck by the dramatic intensity of the Mozartian production. Others, more traditionalist, criticized the scores for being too dense, claiming that the audience might grow weary. The youth of Prague spectators and many enlightened music lovers saw in Don Giovanni the artistic audacity that challenged the codes without rejecting musical refinement. For many, Mozart's strength lay in his ability to embody every emotion, from the lightest banter to the deepest distress, while maintaining a spectacular harmonic rigor. The orchestrations exploited woodwinds, brass, and percussion with balance and inventiveness, drawing from his previous experiences with the abduction from the seraglio. Creativity is reflected in the use of tones. The opening of Don Giovanni begins in D minor, suggesting the doomed fate of the hero, before shifting to a brighter D major. The contrast between shadow and light reflects the dual comic and tragic dimensions of the opera. The minor passages underscore terror and despair, while the major passages accompany seduction and comedy. Mozart employs harmony to illustrate emotional turnarounds with remarkable finesse. This period also reveals the complexity of Mozart's status. Despite his success in Prague, he did not enjoy professional stability at the Vienna court and depended on occasional commissions and concert fees. Each performance reinforced his reputation in Europe. Milan, Munich, Dresden, Berlin programmed his works and awaited his scores. His independent status allowed him greater artistic freedom, but financial imperatives drove him to multiply his initiatives, writing piano concertos and chamber music between stagings of Don Giovanni. His passion for gambling and social life sometimes complicated his budget management, but the aura of his operas still protected him from major material difficulties. The collaboration between Mozart and Da Ponte persisted, driven by the desire to renew the operatic genre. The classical repertoire mainly retains 3 titles: The Abduction from the Seraglio, for German Singspiel, The Marriage of Figaro for refined Italian comedy, and Don Giovanni for the fusion of drama and dark humor. Behind the legend, Mozart's real life involved uncertainties, letters requesting money, and sometimes lukewarm recognition. In Joseph II's reformed and changing Austria, even a talented composer constantly had to prove his worth. Jealousies and criticisms multiplied, but his creative energy was sustained by a few influential admirers, and especially by the public, captivated at each performance. In the wake of Don Giovanni, the opera sparked philosophical, literary, and aesthetic discussions beyond aristocratic circles. Periodicals recounted the evenings, described the plot, and analyzed the score. In salons, there were debates about Don Giovanni, symbol of free thought or condemnable arrogance. The work allowed each listener to project their questions and passions. Comparatively, The Marriage of Figaro already explored the master-servant relationship, but Don Giovanni added a metaphysical and existential dimension that captivated Germany, Bohemia, France, and England, as the score circulated in manuscript copies or printed editions. The period from 1782 to 1787 represents the golden age of Mozart's opera career. Financial constraints, illness, and political tensions would later weigh on his choices, but it was during these 5 years that he established the lasting foundations of his lyrical repertoire. By surpassing the conventional formulas of opera buffa, mastering musical characterization, and excelling in grand ensembles, he profoundly transformed musical theater. By placing humans and their contradictions at the center of the plot, he responded to the aspirations of the Enlightenment while in some way heralding the Romantic upheavals. Don Giovanni, in particular, would mark generations of composers. Beethoven, Weber, and Berlioz would admire the blend of passion and formal structure. With Don Giovanni, Mozart reached a new maturity. He pushed the boundaries of musical theater by blurring the lines between comedy and tragedy, exoticism and realism, social satire, and an exploration of passions. This fusion reflects an era in transition, a few years before the French Revolution. His music expresses the aspirations of an audience eager for psychological depth and artistic freedom. If these operas still fascinate, it is because they embody a unique moment when musical art emancipates from constraints to offer an infinite palette of emotions, celebrated by both sovereigns and amateurs. Section 9. In 1788, the lands of the House of Habsburg experienced an economic crisis. Emperor Joseph II, born in 1741 and died in 1790, implemented fiscal, administrative, and religious reforms, but these, costly and unpopular, triggered resistance. The imperial finances were weakened by conflicts, notably the war against the Ottoman Empire. Patrons, themselves affected by increased taxes and political uncertainty, reduced their support. Attendance at private concerts dwindled, fees decreased, commissions became scarce. For Mozart, then just over 30, financial issues became crucial. He had to multiply initiatives to support his family and still hoped for a stable position. From 1788, the decline of aristocratic patronage further weakened his situation. Accustomed to salons and subscribed concerts, Mozart had to constantly renegotiate his fees. He sought new students, but the Viennese were spending less on music than before. His daily expenses and social obligations burdened his finances, and debts accumulated. He wrote to his friends or patrons to obtain advances, citing illness or family emergencies to preserve his reputation in a worldly universe where financial difficulties greatly harmed prestige. Despite his difficulties, Mozart's creative genius remained intact. To revive public interest and prove his talent, he composed in record time a symphonic triptych, number 39 in E-flat major KV 543, completed on June 26, 1788, number 40 in G minor, KV 550, finalized on July 25th, and number 41 in C major KV 551, later nicknamed Jupiter, finished on August 10, 1788. In a few weeks, he created 3 scores of considerable scale, a true technical and expressive tour de force. The number 39 is distinguished by its majestic introduction, balanced orchestration, and expressive warmth. The use of clarinets, still new in the symphony, reveals Mozart's interest in the unprecedented colors of the winds. While respecting the 4-movement structure, the work charms with its melodic elegance, although it is less famous than its 2 1788 sisters. The number 40 draws attention with its G minor key, associated in the 18th century with melancholy and passion. The first movement, carried by a striking motif, unfolds an unusual dramatic intensity. The andante, more tranquil but rich in contrasts, reveals Mozart's skill in managing dynamics. The minuet, grave and solemn, and the incisive finale reinforce the image of a symphony traversed by intense emotions. It is today considered one of the most moving of the late century. The number 41 in C major, Mozart's ultimate symphony, is perceived as the apotheosis of Viennese classicism. The finale, constructed on multiple contrapuntal motifs, displays an art of counterpoint inherited from the Baroque while maintaining great clarity. The work combines power and lightness, demanding remarkable virtuosity from the orchestra. It is assumed that these 3 symphonies were intended for a cycle of concerts in Vienna or elsewhere, but sources are lacking. Only the number 40 seems to have been performed in Vienna in 1788, while the number 39 and 41 may have been played later, sometimes outside Austria. The rapid genesis of these symphonies reflects Mozart's need to assert his productivity and attract new patrons. For the first time, he composed without a firm commission, taking a financial risk, hoping that aristocrats or institutions would purchase the rights or offer concerts. But Viennese society, marked by fiscal pressure and an unfavorable situation, limited the dissemination of ambitious works. Mozart struggled to profit from his creations, affecting his morale, without preventing him from pursuing regular composition activities, notably chamber music and concertos. Among his supporters is Joseph Haydn, born in 1732 and died in 1809, whose fame is based on the rise of the symphony and string quartet. Aware of Mozart's talent, he maintained a relationship of esteem and artistic exchange with him. In 1785, Mozart dedicated 6 string quartets to him, including the quartet in D minor KV 421 and the quartet in C major KV 465, known as dissonances. The dedication acknowledges Haydn's authority in this domain, while asserting Mozart's ambition. Between 1788 and 1790, Their dialogue continued despite Haydn's stays in England, where the nobility commissioned the London symphonies from him. When available, he served as a support to Mozart, who closely followed his instrumental innovations. The two met to listen to each other's works, comment on a contrapuntal passage, or the balance between winds and strings. Despite small reported rivalries, their artistic complicity remained sincere. Haydn would later declare, "Mozart is the greatest composer I know," emphasizing that despite their 24-year age difference, they respected one another as equals. Seeking to escape the financial deadlock in Vienna, Mozart aimed for a stable position. He turned to the Prussian court, marked by the musical tradition of Frederick II the Great between 1712 and 1786. Since 1786, his nephew Frederick William II, born in 1744 and died in 1797, a cellist passionate about quartets and the cello repertoire, reigned. It was whispered in Vienna that a renowned composer might win over this music-loving sovereign by highlighting his favorite instrument. In the spring of 1789, Mozart prepared for a journey to northern Germany with Prince Karl Lichnowsky. His itinerary included Dresden, Leipzig, and Berlin. He hoped to secure a commission or a position as Kapellmeister at the Prussian court, which would establish him permanently. The trip took place in an agitated Europe. In France, the crisis soon overthrowing Louis XVI erupted, and the roads became less safe. But Mozart's fame and his letters of recommendation opened the doors of capitals to him. In Dresden, he was received with honor. In Leipzig, he visited places where Johann Sebastian Bach, born in 1685 and died in 1750, worked, notably the Church of St. Thomas, and consulted some of his scores to nurture his art of counterpoint. In Berlin, where Frederick William II reigned, Mozart performed before members of the court and presented his works. He composed 3 string quartets dedicated to the king, KV 575, KV 589, and KV 590, created between 1789 and 1790, known as the Prussian quartets. They particularly highlighted the cello, the monarch's favorite instrument. These attempts demonstrate Mozart's adaptability to the tastes of his patrons, but the hope for an official post did not materialize. The king only granted a few occasional compensations without a long-term commitment, likely for political and financial reasons. Mozart left Berlin disappointed but inspired. He observed an active musical life in aristocratic circles, with private concerts and the presence of virtuosos. However, the Prussian court remained marked by the austerity inherited from Frederick II, not conducive to the grand scenic productions to which Mozart was accustomed. Back in Vienna at the end of 1789 and during 1790, he sought to consolidate his income and fulfill his commissions. His creative pace remained sustained. Entertainment music, commissioned pieces, and works aimed at maintaining his prestige. While Joseph Haydn triumphed in London, Mozart also contemplated a journey, all the while pursuing his constant desire to obtain a stable position. The symphonic triptych, completed in 1788, remains a major milestone, although no complete public performance is documented. Manuscript copies circulated among enthusiasts, and some movements may have been played. This period was marked by the Austrian economic crisis, the rarity of festivities, and the declining health of Emperor Joseph II, who died in February 1790. Without stable patronage, Mozart multiplied his efforts, proposed sacred works, sought support, but the political instability hindered musical projects. His chamber music scores from 1789-1790 reveal a refinement nourished by Bach, rediscovered in Leipzig, by Haydn, and by his orchestral experience. The Prussian quartets, designed for a virtuoso cello, stand out for their inventiveness and the importance of the melodic role given to the instrument in homage to the King of Prussia. Less flamboyant than some earlier works, these pieces push the limits of the quartet and reflect the need to please patrons capable of ensuring his financial security. His correspondence reflects his concerns: debts, difficulties in maintaining a respectable status, delayed payments. It also conveys a bitterness towards Viennese society, unable to support his creations. Mozart participated less in public life while remaining active in artistic circles and hinted that he might leave Vienna if a better opportunity presented itself. Between 1788 and 1790, his musical language reached a balance between contrapuntal complexity and melodic clarity. His scores retained freshness and inventiveness, but in an atmosphere of anxiety. The finale of Symphony No. 41 illustrates both his mastery of fugue writing and his desire to unite late Baroque and Classicism, with a theatrical dynamic reminiscent of his operas. In 1790, Joseph II died, and Leopold II, born in 1747 and deceased in 1792, succeeded him. Less reformist, he maintained relative stability. For Mozart, this change perhaps opened cultural prospects, but without certainty. The same year, Haydn left for London and triumphed there, while Mozart remained in Vienna, lacking the means to travel. The contacts made in Berlin in 1789 yielded nothing. His Prussian quartets were sent, but the remuneration was disappointing. The German courts, in a context of political tensions, avoided expenses for lavish musical productions. The three symphonies of 1788 did not ensure Mozart's income sustainably, but they form a peak in his orchestral style, expressing gravity, brilliance, and joy, tinged with nostalgia. In parallel, the Prussian quartets intended for Frederick William II illustrate his adaptation to the expectations of a royal patron. Mozart's art is defined by this mastery of varied registers: opera, sacred music, symphony, chamber music, concerto, and his ability to renew himself. Despite his financial difficulties, the loss of patronage, and the crisis of the empire, Mozart maintained a sustained creative energy. Between 1788 and 1790, he multiplied trips and efforts to seek recognition and stability, but remained in Vienna without an official position. This uncertainty weighed on his daily life. Debts, loans from relatives or patrons. Precariousness was not uncommon at the time, but it was striking for a composer of his rank. Yet, his late works, particularly the symphonic triptych, were recognized by his contemporaries and by posterity as a pinnacle of classicism, combining melody and instrumental dramaturgy. At the end of 1790, Mozart still considered other destinations, perhaps Italy or France, but the French Revolution diverted this project. In Vienna, he then turned to theater and opera, counting on this genre to secure substantial fees and consolidate his fame. His entourage sometimes advised caution, especially since Constance, his wife, was herself experiencing chronic health problems and required a minimum of comfort and security. Mozart, keen to protect his family, had no choice but to remain patient and compose in the hope of better days. The city of Vienna, while tightening its belt, nevertheless remained one of the major hubs of European musical culture. The salons, though reduced, continued to meet, and the imperial court, while rationalizing expenses, retained a certain prestige to which composers could aspire. Many artists and musicians from all over Europe passed through the Austrian capital, including young talents hoping to cross paths with Haydn or Mozart. The following months, during which Mozart composed tirelessly, thus constituted a phase of waiting and questioning. Should he persist in seeking a stable patron? Should he return to press the new Prussian court? Can he hope for a recovery of Viennese prosperity before the emergence of a deeper crisis? So many uncertainties weighed on him, making the moral balance even more delicate. For now, the prospects he had glimpsed in Berlin had dissipated. The idea of obtaining a title of Prussian chapelmaster had not succeeded, despite the relationship initiated by the dedication of the quartets adapted to the tastes of Frederick William II. Disappointments accumulated while Mozart continued to work tirelessly in search of a resolution that would allow him to fully assume his role as a composer and family man. In 1791, Mozart was 35 years old. Famous in Vienna but financially fragile, he was engrossed by numerous projects, new scores, rehearsals, commissions from patrons. It was then that he received a singular commission, a requiem, delivered by an anonymous emissary. This mystery fueled rumors and nourished in Mozart, already beset by morbid premonitions, the idea that he was composing his own funeral mass. The commissioner was actually Count Franz von Walsegg, an Austrian nobleman who, upon the death of his wife Anna, wanted a requiem to be performed in his chapel that he would pass off as his own work. To keep it secret, he sent intermediaries to deliver the messages in payment. The absence of a signature increased the suspicions, and Mozart even confided to his close ones that this mysterious messenger seemed to follow him everywhere. This fear, amplified by posterity, fueled the legend of Mozart writing for his own end. Meanwhile, Mozart was working on an opera that would make a mark on the Viennese scene, Die Zauberflöte, the Magic Flute, presented on September 30th, 1791, at the Theater auf der Wieden. This work combines fantasy, humor, and philosophical allusions inspired by Freemasonry, which Mozart had been a member of since 1784. After the death of Joseph II in 1790 and the ascension of Leopold II, he sought to appeal to a broader audience, mixing aristocracy and popular classes. The libretto by Emanuel Schikaneder reflects Masonic ideals, universal fraternity, the quest for enlightenment, and initiatory rituals. Sarastro embodies wisdom and benevolent authority, while the Queen of the Night symbolizes darkness and ignorance. Musically, Mozart combines virtuoso arias, solemn ensembles, and majestic choruses, creating a work that is both accessible and innovative. The success is immediate, the performances multiply, and Mozart sees it as a promise of prosperity, carried by an audience far wider than that of the imperial court. While the Magic Flute was triumphing in Vienna, Mozart received an imperial commission. For the coronation of Emperor Leopold II as King of Bohemia, he was to compose an opera seria, La Clemenza di Tito. The creation took place in Prague on September 6, 1791, a city where Mozart had been appreciated since Don Giovanni. The libretto by Caterino Mazzola, adapted from Metastasio, arrived late, and Mozart worked tirelessly to set this plot of conspiracy against Emperor Titus to music. The score, rich in virtuoso airs, ensembles, and ceremonial choruses, captivates at times but suffers from its haste, with some courtiers criticizing the rushed execution. In parallel, Mozart had to oversee the revisions of the Magic Flute and continue the Requiem. This workload exhausted him physically. Letters and testimonies mentioned fatigue, pain, pale complexion, and growing anxiety. In Prague, the stress of rehearsals worsened his condition. His contemporaries suspected fevers linked to inflammatory rheumatism or a more serious infection, as doctors were powerless to relieve his pains. Nevertheless, he continued the Requiem with the help of his student Franz Xaver Süssmayr, who would complete the score after his death. Mozart, torn between the public's enthusiasm and the awareness of his fragile health, maintained a clear and inspired writing style. The Kyrie, the Dies Irae, and the Lacrimosa testify to his fervor. He tried to reassure Constanze while working relentlessly. On September 6, 1791, La Clemenza di Tito was performed during Leopold II's coronation in Prague. The rush forced Mozart to delegate certain sections to Süssmayr and copyists. Critics noted some lengthy parts, but praised arias like Vitellia's in the second act. The opera flattered imperial power, but the reception was lukewarm compared to Mozart's earlier successes in Prague. Back in Vienna, he supervised the magic flute and continued the Requiem. His condition alternated between vigor and great weakness. Due to the lack of a reliable diagnosis, later hypotheses varied between poisoning, acute articular rheumatism, or rheumatic fever. All testimonies emphasize his exhaustion. Mozart, aware of financial and artistic pressures, held on to the hope of completing the Requiem and confirming the success of the magic flute. During the autumn of 1791, medical reports described a gaunt and feverish Mozart, correcting his scores late into the night. Constanze worried about seeing him wear himself out, yet he continued to attend some performances of the magic flute, greeted by enthusiastic audiences. At the same time, he worked on the already sketched sections of the Requiem, each page revealing meticulous care in harmony and polyphony. Weakened but inspired, he innovated further with unexpected transitions, as if he wanted to push the limits of his genius one last time. This feverishness fueled his anxieties, yet his close ones also recounted moments of hope, where he believed he could complete his projects. As 1791 progresses, Mozart measures the contrast between the success of the magic flute and his personal difficulties. The imperial court does not grant him any official position, and his finances remain precarious. He approaches the Requiem with urgency, obsessively correcting every line. His valet, Johann Evangelist Stadler, reports that he would sometimes get up at night to jot down an idea that came to him in a dream. His entourage admires this almost superhuman stubbornness, while Constanze tries to protect him despite his exhaustion. At the end of November 1791, his condition worsens. Unable to move freely or stay long at the harpsichord, he still dictates a few instructions to Süssmayr on the Benedictus and the Agnus Dei. The days alternate between delirium and brief flashes of lucidity shared with Constanze. The doctors, powerless, administer calming potions. Mozart keeps several sheets of the Requiem close to him, sometimes humming an unfinished motif, as if in search of the definitive stroke. Although his strength declines, his gaze remains fixed on the idea of completing his final composition. Thus, the year 1791 ends feverishly. On December 5, 1791, shortly after midnight, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart dies in his Viennese residence. His sudden death after an autumn of intense creative activity provokes sadness and confusion. For several weeks, his state of health had been worrying, emaciated, feverish, with swelling in his hands and feet. His loved ones feared a fatal outcome, which later fueled speculations ranging from exhaustion to conspiracy or poisoning. Direct sources, notably Constanze and a few friends, describe the progressive deterioration of a weakened body. The 18th century medicine, limited to visible signs, could not establish a certain cause. The most frequent hypotheses mention acute rheumatic fever, or a poorly treated kidney disease. Others, more fanciful, speak of syphilis or antimony poisoning. In a context where the term fever covered many pathologies, Mozart's death remained shrouded in mystery. and gave rise to sensational stories. The funeral followed the Viennese customs of the late 18th century. Mozart was not destitute, but he no longer enjoyed imperial favor or the means for lavish obsequies. In accordance with Joseph II's legislation, he was buried in a common grave, a common practice for the middle classes. His funeral was conducted with a third-class hearse, few witnesses, and a simple Catholic ceremony. The bad weather dissuaded several acquaintances from going to the St. Mark's Cemetery, far from the center. Contrary to romantic exaggerations, Mozart was not abandoned, but buried according to the strict rules of Josephine Vienna. Parallel to this, legends developed around the Requiem. The most persistent features Count Franz von Walsegg, presented as a mysterious sponsor seeking to appropriate the work. Over time, this story has been enriched with conspiracies and tales of a curse, feeding the image of a Mozart working on his own musical funeral. In popular tradition, it was claimed that he dictated the Agnus Dei to a frightened student before dying. In reality, the Requiem was completed by his disciple Franz Xaver Süssmayr, with Mozart having worked on it intermittently before being interrupted by his illness. The contrast between this prosaic course of events and the public's fascination with an ultimate work reinforced the composer's legend. Upon Mozart's death in 1791, his widow Constanze, aged 29, finds herself alone with two sons, Carl Thomas, born in 1784, and Franz Xaver Wolfgang, born in 1791, the other children having not survived. Her priority becomes financial stability. In a context where copyright protection remains rudimentary and numerous editions circulate without royalties, she undertakes to promote her husband's scores to publishers and organize commemorative concerts. The proceeds, notably thanks to the performance of the Requiem, allow her to clear some debts and improve her son's material conditions. Children grow up in the shadow of their father's name. Carl Thomas turns to commerce and finance without a notable musical career. Franz Xaver Wolfgang becomes a composer and pianist, but remains far from his father's fame. In 1797, Constanze remarries the Danish diplomat Georg Nikolaus von Nissen, who would later become a biographer of Mozart. This marriage allows her to assert herself not only as a widow, but as an agent in preserving the Mozart legacy, by transmitting letters and scores that constitute a valuable documentary collection. At the turn of the 19th century, the memory of Mozart takes on a romantic dimension. In 1793, the German scholar Schlick de Groll publishes an obituary, imprecise but striking. In 1798, Franz Xaver Němeček, a Bohemian publicist, publishes the first biography, relying on accounts from those close to Mozart. He paints the portrait of a captivating genius, magnifying the contrasts between the light of his music and the darkness of his last weeks. This pathetic and laudatory style fuels the image of the misunderstood, solitary, and fallen hero, a representation that Constanze did not seek to refute, as it also served to promote Mozart's work. The turning point comes with Georg Nikolaus von Nissen, who marries Constanze in second marriage. With his help, he gathers documents, letters, annotated scores, and testimonies to publish in 1828 a more rigorous biography set in its social and historical context, but retaining a hagiographic momentum. This vision, focused on the purity of the genius and the misfortune of the man, enhances Mozart's appeal for the Romantic generation. In the imagination of the educated public and then the musicians of the first half of the 19th century, he becomes almost a patron saint of music, endowed with immense talent and cut down in his prime. The biographies, enriched with anecdotes, create a portrait removed from reality, but powerful for posterity. In this romantic atmosphere, Mozart is rediscovered by a new generation of composers. Beethoven deeply admires his operas and piano concertos. Haydn, a privileged witness, spreads his praises among his students, including Beethoven. Schubert, a Viennese, grows up in a climate marked by Mozart's music, which feeds his search for melodic clarity. The image of the misunderstood artist takes hold, fueled by the idea of a genius unrecognized, despite Mozart's real success during his lifetime. This fervor coincides with the revival of his operas at the beginning of the 19th century. The Marriage of Figaro, Don Giovanni, and The Magic Flute are restaged from Berlin to Paris, receiving renewed enthusiasm everywhere. The post-revolutionary era, turned towards new models, embraces Mozart, whose virtuosity and dramatic finesse captivate a broad public, more bourgeois than aristocratic. The first complete editions, published by Breitkopf and Hertel in Leipzig, spread his concertos, symphonies, and operas in conservatories and among amateurs. The movement spreads throughout Europe. In France, Don Giovanni is seen as a revolt against feudal authority, while in Italy, the perfection of vocal style is exalted. Mozart's work thus becomes a central topic of European musical debates. Simultaneously, the image of Mozart reaches artistic circles beyond music. At the turn of the 19th century, Romantic culture celebrates figures of exaltation, deep sentiment, and irrepressible beauty. The German writer E.T.A. Hoffmann, an avid music lover, becomes passionate about Mozart, especially Don Giovanni, which he describes as a quasi-metaphysical work. In his tales and critiques, he attributes to Mozart's genius a transcendent art capable of making the human soul resonate. This vision corresponds to the spirit of the times, where the inspired and quasi-divine creator is glorified. Gradually, Mozartian veneration becomes a pillar of German Romanticism and a reference for European intellectuals. In the visual arts, fascination takes other forms. The French painter Eugène Delacroix, leader of pictorial Romanticism, shares this taste for emotion and passion. His correspondences sometimes mention listening to Mozartian works in literary salons where painters, writers, and music lovers gather. Mozart's premature death reinforces this momentum. His destiny appears cut short, the prodigious light of his music contrasting with a setting deemed banal or unjust. The Romantics, fond of tragedy, find there a powerful lyrical spring. Little by little, Mozart becomes an interdisciplinary icon, invoked by poets, celebrated by playwrights, studied by the first musicologists. His death, surrounded by uncertainties, and his burial without excessive pomp fuel the narratives. The common grave, though in compliance with regulations, is perceived as a scene of misfortune, and the mysterious completion of the requiem crystallizes fantasies. For writers, the unfinished work calls for a narrative continuation, blending last moments, shattered ambitions, and the specter of death. The image of Mozart then transforms into the archetype of the prodigy struck down, contrasted by 19th century critics with other composers more widely recognized, fueling the grand romantic narrative of the sacrificed musician. New critical editions appear, with more exhaustive catalogs of Mozart's works. Publishers like Arteria, André, or Breitkopf and Hertel release scores that were previously unavailable, while some musicologists collect and analyze the scattered manuscripts. The Romantic enthusiasm drives these researches and favors the rehabilitation of lesser-known operas, accompanied by explanatory booklets and critical articles recalling the composer's tragic death. In Parisian salons, his Italianate qualities and quasi-sacred dimension are discussed. The European bourgeoisie, in turn, adopts this Mozart cult, thus gaining universality. E.T.A. Hoffmann describes the overture to Don Giovanni as a magic key, reinforcing the image of music capable of transcending time and space. For the Romantics, Mozartian characters become universal poetic figures. The idea of a brilliant and cursed Mozart aligns with the Romantic taste. They praise the spontaneity of his invention, lament his lack of recognition, and highlight the incompletion of certain works, with his death at 35 appearing as an exemplary tragedy. Romantic painters, such as Delacroix or Moritz von Schwind, also find inspiration in Mozart. Delacroix notes in his journals how his music nourishes his dreamlike visions, while Schwind compares its sweetness to certain pictorial harmonies. Without directly representing the composer, these artists illustrate the expansion of his reputation from the musical field to the entire cultural field. In the 19th century, Mozart's aura spreads throughout Europe. The press publishes numerous reviews of Don Giovanni, admired for its balance between comedy and tragedy, while Così fan tutte, long considered too light, is rediscovered for its musical finesse. The Romantic audience explores all the facets of his work, admiring the balance of forms and expressive intensity. His premature end fuels embellished stories, Mozart bedridden repeating the timpanis or crying from exhaustion, the image of a creative angel gone too soon. The construction of the myth continues with critical additions that reveal forgotten passages and direct musicology. Royal theaters, bourgeois and literary salons claim Mozartian authenticity, his style blending classicism and Romantic expressiveness. Death remains a narrative pivot, symbolizing a genius cut down in full maturity. Young musicians appropriate this heritage to project their own ideals. Beethoven, a future model of the tormented genius, admired Mozart's clarity. Schubert, plagued by illness, adopted his formal principles while adding his introspection. Thus, Mozart becomes the cradle of musical modernity, while retaining the supernatural aura of the child prodigy who disappeared too soon. Literary critics compare him to poets who died young, and German and Austrian musicographers present him as the incarnation of the Germanic soul. Statues are erected, theaters are named in his honor, and his grave becomes a pilgrimage site. His gifts, visible in his quartets, concertos, masses, and operas, also nourish the arts. Delacroix admires the marriage between architecture and melody. Hoffmann transposes the figure of the inspired and persecuted musician. Mozart's death integrates into this Romantic narrative. Whether it was from rheumatic fever or a renal disease, the public prefers the poignant image of a tragic fate. In the 19th century, the rumor of an assassin Salieri, taken up by Pushkin, adds to the drama despite the lack of evidence. The Requiem becomes a central subject of fascination. The anonymous commission and the fragmentary correspondence maintain the mystery. One imagines a composer obsessed with his own demise, a vision dear to the Romantics. In the mid-19th century, musical philology distinguishes Mozart's passages from those of Süssmayr, confirming that the myth of a master, drawing from his madness, is exaggerated. But the work retains its emotional power. Each annotated edition reaffirms the idea of a testament and an ultimate confession. The Mozartian figure, consolidated by various narrative layers, also asserts itself in other literary circles. English Romanticism, with Mary Shelley and Lord Byron, does not directly promote Mozart, but associates his name with the tragic fate of young deceased artists, a model of creative brilliance. On the continent, Heinrich Heine and Théophile Gautier praise the harmony of his scores. Painters find in him a formal perfection they wish to transpose. Delacroix, focused on epic or exotic scenes, evokes this perfection in his colors and lights, and his close ones report that he listened to Mozartian arias before painting. Through these musical, pictorial, and literary convergences, Mozart's death in 1791 becomes the catalyst for cultural enthusiasm fueled by burgeoning Romanticism. Historical irony strikes the minds, dying in Vienna, the musical capital, but buried without pomp, in a context of economic scarcity and sanitary rules. Posterity transforms this paradox into a myth. A sacred genius disappears in indifference, and his music rises as a song of eternity. Each country modulates this narrative by combining artistic grandeur and tragedy. The date of December 5th, 1791, recurs in all accounts as a symbol, commemorated enduringly. From the common grave to the legend, Mozart becomes a pillar of music history. Novelists, notably Hoffmann, and romantic painters like Delacroix, bestow upon him a symbolic dimension surpassing the memorial. The medical uncertainty about his death and the silence of his burial fuel the imagination. Mozart embodies the enchanting artist who died young, whose art remains both a legacy and a key to interpreting the sensible world.